Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, and my friend Matt Bishop from Australia. There he is, just there.
That's me. That's the
Hi
good-looking
Matt.
one.
Yeah, thank you. True that. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. I just thought I'd go live on today's one because I fancied getting some interaction with you guys, actually, mainly to do with my second video, but unfortunately most of you probably haven't seen it already because I'm doing this too quickly on the back of that. And also just a bit of housekeeping. So YouTube went down for about an hour and no one could upload videos, it appeared. And as a result, the two I have uploaded this morning, people are consistently telling me there's no notifications out there. So I've re-uploaded the first one. So both, it's on there twice, but hopefully the new version of it will get some traction with the algorithm. So I think it was all just screwed up. YouTube was just screwed up, and so no one's really. I was looking at the stats. No one's really looked at my first two videos. They're just not being advertised by YouTube, if you like. And it was a shame because I really wanted people to watch my second video on time before this, because I've got this really big sense of gravity about what is going on at the moment in Ukraine and how particularly European leaders are responding to that gravity and to the rather desperate situation Ukrainians are in with regard to materiel. And also, this idea that we are inching towards a world war in many different dimensions. And there was a lot of, I think, good source stuff on that video, particularly with regard to the lunch at the Munich Security Conference between a bunch of world leaders and dignitaries and historians and journalists and politicians and generals, all these great people there, and all talking pretty much the same language. And that's the language that we need to be doing stuff now or yesterday or last year. And we need to be doing it big time because this has got serious now. So that's where I am with kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Matt's here with us. He's in Australia, married to a Ukrainian, lived in Kharkiv. You don't know him. He's Sabrent on the threads. So thanks a lot, Matt, for being my soundboard here.
Yeah, always welcome. Yeah, I miss you when you don't invite me to lives.
Do you know what? I've actually considered that. I've actually done lives when I think, I know Matt's in bed now, or it's too late in Australia, and I bet he's. I wonder if he's not. I wonder if he's going. Oh, come on, John, why didn't you? Yeah, so I did get that.
No, I do actually miss you, but I do usually stay up till another 3 hours beyond where it is now. So,
there you go. Yeah. So I should always risk giving you a poke. So you were before we get into what I'm going to do is go through my military and geopolitical news. This is basically just my normal news video, but actually with the interaction of the viewers, which I think is important. Before we go there, you went in Perth, Australia, to the Ukrainian kind of march solidarity gathering. What were your experiences of that? You got your NATO flag in the back that I showed a picture of to everyone, so that was really cool that you sent that. So what were your experiences?
Look, it's pretty much the same as all of them that I go to. I sadly, I actually always feel like an outsider when I'm there, because I'm not Ukrainian.
Yeah.
But there's a big group of Ukrainians who are there. We're actually, strangely, we're always expecting trouble. There's usually quite a substantial police presence standing off.
You genuinely expecting trouble? Who
from Russians.
Yeah.
So there's been a few things where the police, I know, have recommended changes of venues, or don't have a rally here or there, because it's harder for us to protect you or something like that. So there's always quite a substantial police presence there, usually standing in the background. But it's really sad. We had the minute of silence, And you just saw, all these people with just tears down their faces because they've lost people.
Mm,
They're just, they all know people that have died or been maimed, or um, but it's always nice to get there. It's always nice to see the people that you haven't seen for a while, because we're not particularly hugely active in the community here. I know they're on Facebook and things like that, but I don't have Facebook, um, or rather, Facebook won't let me into my account. So for us, we're not hugely engaging in the community, but it's really nice to see. And I think for us, we probably only had 300 maybe people turned up, but in a city of 2 million, that's not too bad. And they don't advertise it, so it's primarily Ukrainians going there to support Ukrainians
yeah,
rather than
yeah.
everyone else, marching for Ukraine.
And I guess that's a challenge, isn't it? To try and move that towards a greater a consciousness of what's going on by kind of throwing out the idea that you're gathering to try and get some domestic momentum in whatever country you're in. I was just upset that well, it was really actually pragmatically difficult for me to do anything on that particular day, but it would have required me going to London really, and that was not going to happen. But yeah, so I'd loved it if there's something in Portsmouth, and I would have gone to that, or Southampton. But and maybe there was, but it's just trying to find was I looking in the right places? But anyway, it's good that Perth had one,
Yeah,
so that's cool.
yeah, it happened pretty much all over Australia, I believe.
Yeah,
So, you know,
yeah,
um, yeah, it's just there wasn't any U-Butte, let's get everyone in Perth to turn up,
yeah, yeah,
because to be honest, I think we had one before where a minister got up there and said, "Oh, all the right things," but nothing got done.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
indeed. Yeah. Well, look, before we go on to general chat about the kind of the state of affairs with what's going on, I'm going to do the military aid segment here. And we're going to start with what this kind of feeds onto what I was saying in my last video, if you guys have seen it, which is the one talking about we are basically inching towards or already kind of in a world war. Timothy Snyder talks about how we're in a world war. We just don't realize it, primarily because there's only one side that's fighting that world war on behalf of everyone else. But actually, we're providing the kind of military equipment, and we're looking to ramp that up to levels that have not been seen for many a year. And we are fighting already in the cyberspaces and the information spaces. And this is kind of what I do. I often talk about being in the trenches of the information spaces, doing that fighting in a way that I think is important for the cause. And I just think that with what we saw with Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and his convening of this emergency meeting last night in Paris for 20 odd leaders and foreign secretaries and whatnot, I think is a reflection of how serious this has got, and the fact that he's done a couple of things. And again, I'm repeating what I said in that last video, but I think this is so freaking important. And I say hats off to Emmanuel Macron. Like, say what you like about him, he gets a lot of criticism domestically and from abroad, but actually I think what he's done is communicate quite clearly how important the war is and how desperate the situation is for the Ukrainians in terms of equipment. And also by tabling the idea of troops on the ground in Ukraine. And that might not be frontline troops, it's just maybe maintenance crews or just Western forces in some way, training. But by putting that out there, he's now shifted the Overton window, and we are now prepared to at least talk about that, which I think is super important. So even though he might be getting criticisms for saying it's not off the table that troops might end up in Ukraine, he might get some really strong, robust criticisms today, but that's not the point. The point is that now we feel okay to talk about it. It's as he said, it's not off the table. What are your thoughts about that, Matt?
Oh, I think we're all going to get sucked in. I
Yeah,
think it's that simple. I really do. If Ukraine crumbles, and I've said it before, if Ukraine crumbles, Russia suddenly has 4 million troops, because every single fighting age man is going to be grabbed by the
co-opted.
Russians
Yeah.
and thrown into NATO, against NATO. it's that simple for me,
And
because that's
actually,
what they've done before.
yeah, in that security conference in Munich, in that luncheon that I was just referencing in the video that I did before, someone actually talked about that and said exactly that you know, that's what they do, and they'll pick up troops in that way. But yeah, so another reflection of how serious this is, and I haven't seen confirmation of this, so take that into account. Poland's foreign minister Sikorski, who's, by the way, a very interesting guy. I wonder whether he might eventually be a prime minister of Poland. But he's been saying a lot of good stuff. He said that he had that wonderful speech at UN Security Council recently. He's come out and been very critical about Congress not passing aid. And interestingly, I think one of his sons is in the US Army as well. So, you know, it's not like he's completely unconnected to the US. He's been very outspoken. But he says that Poland will increase its military spending to 8%, and it's already 4.2% today of GDP.
Wow.
So that is huge, because that's above the US, which is often complaining that European nations aren't spending enough as a percentage of GDP on defense. But to go from 4.2 to 8%, to double an already massive expenditure, and they are buying HIMARS, they're buying stuff from South Korea left, right, and center. They're getting all sorts of equipment. Is huge, and as he says, if we start getting really threatened by Russia, you know, that's it. So it says, and I don't know if this is a counterfactual, so it will increase it if it starts getting really threatened by Russia, rather than we are going to increase it. So the way this is written, that's why I'm saying that this, you know, take this with a pinch of salt. But if it's a counterfactual, it's still very strong rhetoric. It's clear that the Ukrainian defeat would make all the alarm bells ring in Warsaw.
There's an interesting thing there. If they really get threatened by Russia, well, Russian TV saying they're going to nuke Poland every second day. I'm wondering what an actual threat by Russia is, and by then it's too late. You know,
Yeah.
by the time the Russian army's knocking on your door, it's too late to go, oh, quick, spend 8% of our GDP.
Yeah.
You know,
So I was talking about that in one of yesterday's video with the lily pond analogy, that, you know, theory of exponential growth is that at the 29th day, when you're looking at a pond that's going to fill up with lily ponds in 30 days, you look at the pond on the 29th day, you say, oh, it's only half full, right? But of course, if it's doubling, if there's this momentum that goes forward, then the next day, you know, the 29th day is too late to do something about it. And the question is, are we in Europe at the 29th day? Are we looking at things and saying, oh, it's not too bad, but actually it's already too late to start pumping in that money to do something right now about the problem we're facing?
I think Europe kind of took their foot off the pedal when they realized that Ukraine was holding. You know, when
Yeah.
Ukraine
So
was starting
yeah,
to get those victories, they went, oh, it's not as bad as we first thought, and now they're going, oh, hang on, you know, because you've had the US drop out, you know, basically of supporting. Whether you want to say it's just all Republicans or whatever, but
yeah.
they've effectively dropped out over the last 4 months, and so suddenly you've got Ukraine, you know, starting to go on the retreat now across every single front line. So
And and that was what Timothy Snyder was saying in that Munich Security Conference luncheon that I keep talking about. He said that almost Ukraine were a victim of their own success, because they did so well at the beginning that people didn't get worried enough to really come to their aid in the way that they desperately needed. So you know, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. But yeah.
there's also another unspoken part of this, I believe anyway. I think that Europe and the US were concerned about giving so much weaponry to an ex-communist country without ever factoring in the fact that Ukraine was communist because it was invaded and occupied. So there's always that, because Ukraine is a democracy. You might feasibly 5 years time, you might have a more pro-Russian government, which would then give a lot of that equipment over to Russia or something like that. You know, so there was always that kind of concern because Ukraine hadn't proved itself. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So moving on, the European Parliament has voted in favour of the 50 billion euro aid package to Ukraine. So this was already agreed upon and it got through, but this is the formal ratification of that that's taken place. 536 MEPs, 40 against. Actually, so that's more of a majority than I thought there would be. And that's good news to show quite widespread European unity on that, to be honest. So thankful to the European Union for standing with Ukraine, says Anton Gerashchenko. The Ukrainians will not be ready for defense without help of USA, says Zelenskyy. This is that mission that, despite all the intentions of the EU and European nations and other allies, without American help, Ukraine are in serious trouble. And so they need that aid package. There are two plans. If we receive an aid package from USA, then we'll prepare to deoccupy our territories. And if not, Trump doesn't understand Putin because he's never fought him. So there are two different points there. And if not, then so this is the idea that Syrskiy's apparently and Zelenskyy are doing two plans: the offensive one and the defensive one, depending on whether they get US aid. But then also he's been asked a lot about Trump, and I think you have a lot of journalists that are trying to ask divisive questions to Zelenskyy to get clickbait news, to get big news, for him to say, "Yeah, bloody Trump" or whatever. But Zelensky's no idiot, right? And he knows he can't say anything bad about Trump, anything divisive. So he says the right thing all the time, which is Trump needs to come to Ukraine, and as soon as Trump comes to Ukraine, he will understand. And that's a good answer, and I think that's accurate as well. What are your thoughts on that, mate?
Look, Zelenskyy is a statesman. He's always thinking, of how things are going to be interpreted by the different groups out there. He's very good with his language. Whoever actually does his speech writing for him or coaches him is just exceptional. He is a statesman that we haven't had in politics, I think, for a long, long time in many countries. Obama was one. In the UK, I can't think of a statesman until you go back to Churchill or something. Yeah, there might be someone I'm missing, but Australia hasn't had a statesman, Bob Hawke, when he told us all to take a day off when Australia 2 won the America's Cup. That's a true statesman.
that gets your vote.
Yeah, he got a whole of Australia's vote. That did.
So I'm going to, and I know this. Okay, so for my American viewers, I'm going to go to MSNBC. But interestingly, Morning Joe, although that's not Joe, Joe Scarborough is a former Republican. Was he a representative or a senator? I don't know, congressman or senator. Anyway, Joe Scarborough's program on MSNBC is coming from someone who is a former Republican. Anyway, this is Joe Hines, who is on the right there. He's a Democratic lawmaker who went to the Munich Security Conference and met Zelenskyy, and JD Vance didn't meet Zelenskyy, and he's one of these anti-Ukraine aid Republicans. Anyway, I just want to listen to a few things this guy says.
Yeah, absolutely. And
can you hear that, by the way?
Yep.
Heard Zelenskyy and his people say this is a turning point in the war. If we are cut off from U.S. aid, we will slowly lose this war. And he gave example after example. And, no surprise there. What was a surprise was, and was honestly very hard, was the juxtaposition of an example of precisely how murderous Vladimir Putin is with his widow, literally 2 hours after she learned that her husband had been killed in an Arctic prison, addressing Munich and then coming to meet with us. I mean, the fortitude was unbelievable, but the demonstration of Putin's murderousness, along with just the sheer hypocrisy of my Republican colleagues who listened to Zelenskyy and said, "Oh, we're going to work so hard to get this done. We're going to work so hard to get this done." And then you say to them, "Well, are you willing to, for example, sign a discharge petition, which is one of the ways we could get Ukraine aid to the floor?" And they say, well, that would create all sorts of problems for me in my primary,
And by the way, that's a really interesting point, because there are a lot of Republicans who want to do the right thing, but they know that if they do the right thing, that actually their base voter, they're afraid of their base voters punishing them for giving Ukraine aid to Ukraine, punish them at their primaries, so that another Republican will get voted over them to represent that district or that state. And so this is a real issue. So it's not that the Republicans don't know what the right thing to do. It's that they're worried about the base punishing them for doing the right thing because Ukraine has become a partisan issue. That is an interesting observation there.
And then you've got J.D. Vance running around pretending as though, providing aid to Ukraine and sending that signal to Putin and sending that signal to Taiwan, to China, that somehow that is not affordable to the United States. $60 billion being more or less a rounding error in our annual defense bill. It was just, I got to tell you, it was a really hard couple of days.
So, Congressman.
And I thought that was interesting. He said, as someone who's supporting Ukraine as a lawmaker from the US, that was a hard couple of days going to the Munich Security Conference, especially when some of my colleagues were walking around basically slagging off Zelenskyy and Ukraine aid, like J.D. Vance. So I thought that was interesting. And then he goes on, the guy who's interviewing him, one of the other guys, goes on to talk about frozen assets and his view on frozen assets. And he talks about how that is the future of aid to Ukraine, is doing something with frozen assets. You've got $300 billion plus of frozen assets. And at the moment, what they're doing is they're scraping off the kind of interest. So like, it makes money, and they're using that at the moment to help aid Ukraine. I think that's already going into some of the funding to Ukraine. But the idea is that there should be some future to getting all of that to Ukraine.
Expected turning over the principle. I think at the end of the day, when all is said and done, that will be the answer. But, the argument the Europeans make is that this is a fight between countries that believe in the rule of law and Vladimir Putin, who observes no law. So we've got to be particularly careful about observing the law. And they're not wrong about that. And as I said before, who doesn't have any credibility at that table is the country that can't seem to get out of its own way and provide a tiny amount of aid that would make all the difference to the Ukrainians.
I mean, wow, he is angry about his own country not providing aid, this guy. But I just want to continue for a little bit.
And Congressman, Steve Ratner was on earlier today. We were talking.
This is Joe Scarborough. This is and his wife Micah. So he is the former Republican representative. I might have to. Is having a bit of trouble there. So I'm just going to refresh that. Oh no.
Aid to Ukraine, how much we spend, how much European countries spend. You have Donald Trump running around lying, talking about how they're not doing their share, and big countries saying, oh, we're not going to do our 2%. We're not going to do our share. Steve Ratner pointed out to us a couple of fascinating facts. When it comes to percentage of our GDP, the United States funding for Ukraine is 0.3%.
So I know I've told you this in the last couple of days, and I brought out the Kiel Institute. Sorry, I'll let you talk in a second, Matt. But the Kiel Institute stats, and I've talked about that. What I like about this, and why I'm showing you this, is that this is really good news that a mainstream media source is also talking about this and putting that information out there, because it's about accuracy and context, and people need to be armed with the right information.
0.3%. That ranks us. Are you ready? Are you ready from the allies? That ranks us number 31 in terms of how big of supplies we're giving to the Ukrainians. So 31.
So he couldn't find the words here, but this is how big that our, you could say, bank balances is not, because you're talking about trillions of debt, but this is how much we are worth, right? And as a percentage of how much we are worth, we are giving one of the lowest amounts of aid to Ukraine. However, because we are worth so much, what we are giving is incredibly important and very, very welcome in being received by the Ukrainians.
You rank 31. And then the thing that, for the J.D. Vances of the world, they're saying, oh, we need to spend the money here in the U.S. We don't need to be spending the money all over. Well, that's a lie, too, because as Ratner says, about 2/3 of that $61 billion, about 2/3 of it goes to U.S. companies, goes to U.S. suppliers. 2/3 of that money, of that bill, goes to American companies. And so, again, their lies fall flat, whether it's Donald Trump lying about other countries not doing their part, or our senators and House members, Republicans, lying about the fact that this is a giveaway to Europe. It's just not.
And just finally to say what Joe Hines has to say back to that. But he's right, and I know this is going to be divisive with Republicans and whatnot, but the southern border comes up a lot, doesn't it? And Joe Hines says something to that.
Yeah, and remember, Joe, the other thing, you're absolutely right about that. Again, on a relative basis, we're pretty squishy compared to the Europeans, right? Compared to the size of our economy, compared to per capita donations. The other thing that I've been dealing with for weeks, if not months, is this argument, and every Republican says it, which is that we need to secure our border. And until we secure our border first, we shouldn't be worried about the Ukrainian border. That's their talking point. Well, guess what? This whole idea that we can't do both at once. We are a country that runs a Medicare program, a Medicaid program, a space program, a foreign aid program. You know, we're helping the Taiwanese. We're doing 1,000 things around the world. And yet the Republicans have somehow decided that there's a trade-off between helping Ukraine and helping the border. So yeah, let's fix the border. What if we came up with a Senate bill that got strong bipartisan support that Mitch McConnell would say was the best deal they're going to get, better than the deal they would get if Donald Trump was president? What if we did that, Joe? Oh, wait a minute. We did do that a couple of weeks ago, and the Speaker of the House and House Republicans said, sorry, we're not going to do that. And you know why they said that? Because they would much rather run in November on chaos in the border than actually even genuflect in the direction of solving the problem at the border.
Absolutely right, and he goes on. I think, or maybe not in this, and maybe another video I'm talking about. But you know, someone I said, like, you know, we can pat our head and rub our tummy at the same time. You know, we can walk and chew gum. This is not difficult. We should be able to do the border and Ukraine aid. And so Ukraine aid is the only thing that's been connected to the border. Well, you can say, you know, Ukraine aid, Taiwan and Israel, but yeah, it's being singly cherry picked, and so therefore it's not about connecting it to the border. It's about leverage, and it is about it's about not giving aid to Ukraine, essentially, because otherwise you could connect the border to any bit of legislation passed through US Congress. So anyway, those are my thoughts, and I thought that was an interesting view from a Democrat there, and Joe Scarborough as well, to reflect, I think, you know, what I believe about the situation. But anyway, Matt, any thoughts?
Look, I always go back to other Republicans trying to torpedo Ukraine aid because it was a Democratic president, wasn't it? It was Clinton, wasn't it, who did the Budapest memorandum? So, you know, whether it's actually a kind of dig at you know, the Democrats or something like that to make it so it's the Democrats who didn't manage to uphold an agreement that the Democrats made, you know, to try and get a bit of egg on the face in that regard. But the thing is America did do an agreement with a country to say, get rid of your nukes and we'll protect you.
As did Britain
the big
and France.
Problem, yeah, and the big problem here is if Ukraine is not protected, every other country out there is going to start saying, oh, do we need to get nukes? And then we suddenly end up with 100 countries with nukes. And it doesn't matter which country you are. If there's 100 countries with nukes, we're going to end up with World War III. You know?
Yeah, a lot of people have also been saying that part of the reason why Trump is not so forward in supporting Ukraine is that he is still smarting, and we know he's a vengeful person, but he's still smarting about Zelenskyy not giving him the dirt on Biden in there. So a lot of people say, "Oh, Trump was brilliant for Ukraine. He gave them javelins," but people also forget to mention, yeah, he gave them javelins, but he tried to blackmail Zelenskyy in not, you know, this is why there was an impeachment. Right, he tried to blackmail Zelenskyy to give him dirt on Biden, but Zelenskyy didn't do that, and that still hurts with Trump. And so that is why some analysts are saying Trump will never really come strong on supporting Ukraine, because he that hurt him a lot. I don't know.
Oh yeah. Trump acts like a big, a big kid, doesn't he? He's, you know, the playground bully. If he doesn't like something, he reacts aggressively, calling names, that type of thing. It's you know, I always look at it like this. If I was in a room, would I talk to the man, ignoring the fact that he was, you know, president or stands for any political party? Would I have a beer with the guy? And the answer is no. I don't like the character. You know, I don't like the way he bullies people, and he's done that all his way through, because that's been successful in business. And you know yourself, if you're ever in business, you get those bullies that are there in the meetings and things like that, and you got to deal with them.
Well, it's interesting. I've told you this before on various videos, but there's a good section in Madeleine Albright's book on fascism where she deals with the Donald Trump tenure, and she talks about him as, so she is a former foreign secretary, well, Secretary of State. Yes. So she talks about Donald Trump being a zero-sum game, transactional. Everyone knows he's transactional, but what that means is, yeah, that can be good for business, but it's thinking that international diplomacy is exactly the same as doing business is incorrect. So if you look at business, say, right, your gain is taking a market share from me, from my business, so therefore you can't do well because it means I'm doing badly. Okay, and you go and you take that through all the dealings you do in business, then if you apply that to international diplomacy, then alliances make no sense. So the reason why he doesn't like NATO is because actually it's a positive sum game, which is like a win-win for everyone in NATO. And even though the US might be paying a little bit more, what happens is that they're also exporting security and getting trade deals on the back of that. So actually it is still positive for the US, even if they do pay more as a percentage of GDP. Now, I don't think Europe paid enough, and there are genuine good criticisms there. But the idea is that if you take zero-sum game mentality into international diplomacy, you will not be working in alliance with people. You will see everyone, whether they are European, whether they're South American, whether they're African, whether they're Chinese, whether they're Russian, whether they're Australian, you'll see everyone as essentially a competitor, rather than on your side to work with you against a larger group of competitors. So that kind of transactional approach is a problem. Anyway, I digress. 4 brigades, that, as per usual, that were preparing for a counteroffensive did not receive the promised Western equipment. They simply did not participate in the counteroffensive. The partners shook hands, but in fact, the equipment simply did not arrive. Now, I don't know what Zelenskyy is referring to here, but we know at the beginning of the spring counteroffensive last year that didn't turn into a spring counteroffensive. It became a summer counteroffensive. It started in sort of late May, or certainly May time, which was months and months after it was supposed to start. Zelenskyy admitted at the time they hadn't received equipment yet, and they hadn't fulfilled their training sort of quotas and whatnot. So this is now looking back at that time period, I presume, and like 4 brigades that were preparing for that counteroffensive literally didn't have the equipment they're supposed to have. So, you know, the counteroffensive appears to have been somewhat hamstrung from the very, very beginning. German military aid to Ukraine has updated their database with the delivery from Germans. So what's been pledged and now been delivered. So 10 vector drones, 22 anti-drone sensors and jammers, got mine clearing tanks, border protection vehicles, remote controlled demining equipment, toolkits, shells. So 14,000 shells. I know it's not a huge amount. It's great that that's getting there. Night vision goggles, satellite communications terminals. And they've also pledged 2 more Bergerpanzer armored recovery vehicles, which is good news. Germany's also said, the government reported on the 26th of February that the dispatch of those 14,000 shells, reconnaissance drones. Sorry, that's not what they've also said. That was confirming that. Now, Germany are doing an awful lot, and although Olaf Scholz is getting a hard time over Taurus, we shouldn't let that sort of cloud what Germany are doing. It's very easy to have a go at Germany for Taurus, but actually they are doing an awful lot. They've ramped up massively production. Their industrial military complex is working overtime. And so Germany are sort of taking a really good stance at the moment. In fact, German aid from Ukraine, we'll come to that a little bit later, but it was given a lot of hassle online for Taurus, for Olaf Scholz not giving Taurus, as if German aid to Ukraine is some kind of like spokesperson for Scholz or something, which is not the case. Moving on, 2023 became the year where the defense industry in Ukraine started running on a large scale and started making an impact on the front lines, said Commission, Mr. Top Knot Man, as I always say, just to remind you who he is. And Ukraine, well, 2 claims here that are a bit contradictory. So Max 23 says Ukraine has caught up with Russia in the production of kamikaze drones of the Shahid type. What is exploding in Russia is all our work, Commission noted. So this is a claim that they are now at the point where Russia are in the manufacture of Shahid-style drones. But then Kyiv Independent says Ukraine is to catch up with Russia in the production of Shahid drones in 2024. Sometimes Max 23 gets their claims wrong, and that's why I like good references. But anyway, Kyiv Independent says Ukraine's capacity to produce drones similar to the Iranian design Shahid drones are no longer inferior to Russia's, which would indicate that is now. So I don't quite know what to think about that, because it said they will catch up in 2024, then they are no longer inferior, which means they're on a par now, according to Commission. The Ukrainian version of the Shahid drone is identical to the original in terms of the amount of explosives they can carry, their range, and other technical parameters, he said on national TV. This is great news. So everything Russia is doing with their Shahids, or has been doing, Ukraine can now do to Russia. At least within the range of the Shahids. Russia's a much bigger country, so I don't know how far they can get into like the northern and eastern reaches of Russia. What are your thoughts, Matt, on the Ukrainian production of these drones?
I actually think possibly because Ukraine's managed to turn out the Shahids themselves, I actually think that might be a reason why the Taurus actually haven't been released, because the Shahids will give them quite a good reach into Russia. I could be wrong on that, but the Shahids have proved really effective against Ukraine.
Yeah.
That it's not bunker busters or anything like that. And as for production, look, from what I've seen of them, they're not complicated. So you should be able to absolutely churn them out, especially if you start substituting some of the parts. Like I was looking at the body of it before, and it was rolled metal and that, but there's no reason why you can't use something like a PVC pipe or something like that, to simplify production as well.
This kind of goes to what I've been saying a number of times recently, and when I speak to Greg, and he's on near the front lines, and he's hearing from all sorts of things, and you're hearing from frontline units, and they are going to be negative about the state of affairs. So things are tangibly tough for the Ukrainians on the front line. They're losing ground. They have no ammunition, or very small amounts of ammunition and material. Okay, their main issue outside of the material is obviously boots on the ground, and that is an issue that is not going to be able to be solved by outside agents. However, I am quite positive about Ukraine going forward. So Ukraine are ramping up their own production, and they're doing a really good job of ramping up production of things like drones, and hopefully scale of missiles that can fire 700 kilometers. We've heard from people like Commission that they can make 700-kilometer missiles. If they can make them at the rates that Russia are making them, in the same way they're making drones, then do you know what? Things are going to change. Because I think Ukraine have better intelligence than Russia do, and their ability to strike targets more accurately and time-sensitive targets will be better than the Russians.
And I'm gonna interrupt you. The Ukrainians are smarter than the Russians.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
If you look at their history, Russia's always plagiarized Ukraine for all their intellectuals, but even more recently, Russia hasn't turned to a I can't think of the word, technological, damn it, you know the right word, society, whereas Ukraine has.
They are sanctioned as well, which makes, I mean, I'm always wary about using really kind of simplistic generalizations of like Ukrainians are X, Russians are Y. But I think if you look at the brain drain Russia have had, okay, Ukraine, you could argue, might have had the similar in people leaving Russia. When you look at the sanctions impact on the technological sectors in Russia, then actually they might well have a competitive disadvantage to Ukraine there. So that is a really relevant point to make.
Talking Bloke actually summed it up by Ukraine has a very tech savvy population.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's much better than my ramblings.
Yeah, for sure. And they do, and they've had that. They had that prior to the war. as it's one of their expertise. Canada is committed to Ukraine's long-term security. That's why we've signed, says Bill Blair, an historic agreement on security cooperation between Canada and Ukraine. As part of this commitment, Canada will provide $3.02 billion in critical financial and military support in Ukraine in 2024. Now, that's really significant. Canada have actually been really staunch supporters in terms of rhetoric, but arguably they haven't actually put the money where their mouth is, considering the size of their economy, although they're not a huge country in terms of population. So we need to be careful about how we compare. But actually, if I'd like to know if that's Canadian dollars or US dollars, but if they are committing really significant figures to Ukraine in the next year, then that's very good news. The Czech president, Petr Pavel, has approved, and I find this fascinating, 20 out of 76 Czech applicants seeking to join the Ukrainian armed forces. So the Ukrainian armed forces, as far as I understand it, have made it easier for foreign fighters to sign up for them. And Czech Republic, it looks like Petr Pavel himself as president gives the permission for individual cases to allow people to do that, which is kind of weird. But since Russia's full-scale invasion, Czech has issued 132 permissions for its citizens to enlist in Ukraine's military. Now, one of the options for Ukraine is to make it easier for foreign entities to fight for Ukraine. In the same way that Russia does that, Ukraine needs to be able to compete with that, because their major disadvantage is boots on the ground. So if they can make it easier, then I think they should. Voice of America states that US military is using its own funding to train Ukrainian soldiers. So as the US Army has been forced, due to the impasse in Congress, it's been forced to use its own funding to support the training of Ukrainian troops. As well, US military officials told VOA that if nothing changes, the US Army in Europe and Africa may run out of funding for everything, including the support for Ukraine and training and operations with NATO partners by summer. I mean, the problem with things not going through Congress, like the big $100 billion aid bill in total, that big aid package, means that where they can, they're going to be eking out expenditure out of existing budgets, which can't last. And so, there is trouble afoot potentially. Zelenskyy, so talking about mobilization issues, one of the big ones that Ukrainians have been complaining about is demobilization. So how long do you serve in if you have volunteered? Like, is that it? You're volunteered for the rest of your life until you die, and that's pretty harsh? Or is there some kind of time limit where actually you're allowed to leave the army? Zelenskyy signed a bill on conditions for demobilization of conscripts. According to the proposal, conscripts whose term of service expired during martial law was extended beyond the established period are released to the reserves, interestingly. So you're not released completely from the army, but to the reserves after 12 months. So that's pretty significant there. And then we're going to move on to the Air Force. So Yuri Ignat, the spokesperson for the Air Force, believes that Ukraine needs at least 5 F-16 brigades, which is approximately 180 aircraft. Wow. To protect the airspace of the largest country in Europe. The number is quite adequate. Wouldn't surprise me. And I imagine, they're going to want as many as they can get their hands on. And they will need far more than they have been promised already. Although there's kind of a bit of grey areas as to what they have been promised. There were ideas previously of them getting over 100, I think, was it? I can't remember now, something like 150. Or then there's number 60 around, and what they're actually getting, what they've been pledged, or how many might be coming in the pipeline. All of this, it seems to be rather a grey area, and I'm not quite sure. Matt, any sort of questions or anything from the comments?
I was Tony actually just said that he's a American who's joined the Ukrainian military, and he's in Ukraine now.
Oh my goodness, I'm an American and I've joined the Ukraine army. Well, so Tony Covington, that's very interesting, and goodness me, that is incredible. Of course, I don't know Tony Covington, so we had this before. If you remember Orsis, that was hanging around the threads, who was claiming he was in Klishchivka, and it was occasionally like saying, "I'm live now and I'm suffering from, there's artillery going off at the moment." It turns out that he was in fact a scammer. from why America in Ukraine, why Ukraine. He'd gotten to his. What James from there alerted me that on another platform he had tried scamming that platform for aid, for funding, and the pictures he had drawn from the internet, and he had been found out basically. So I'm quite happy that I was quite guarded about all this. Now, Tony, by the way, I'm not at all saying that you're not who you say you are, but we always obviously need to be careful about people and names on the internet. So Tony, if you have done that, you are truly brilliant, because there is nothing more noble than putting your body where your sentiments are. You know, if you are prepared to join an army and fight for what is good and proper when that army is not your nation's army, because you feel that it is moral obligation, then there is no higher praise I can give you, you know, in terms of being prepared to put your money where your mouth is. But yeah.
I've just,
and let us know, Tony, by the way. Sorry, let us know, Tony, of any details.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, I thought you'd finished. John Fallon's asked me a question of what's the pulse of the Australian citizens? And honestly, most of them think that Ukraine's a long way away and it's nothing to do with them. Oh boy, I'm going to sound very derogatory of the majority of Australians. Sorry to all the Australian viewers here. But most Australians aren't really interested in politics or world events because, you know, being up the top of the world like we are.
Being at the arse end of the world.
The top. Thank you. Come on. Doesn't the word for compass actually come from the Chinese word, which means pointing south or something, wasn't it? So Australia's actually at the top of the world. Don't
hit me with facts. Whatever. In space, there is no up and down.
Exactly. But yeah, Australia's a long way away from everything. So unless you get the chance to actually talk to people, most people aren't really aware of it. And of course, you get a lot of NATO expanded east, and I'll sit there and always say, did it? Where? Show me the country. Show me the agreement that NATO broke. You know that Russia's got nuclear missiles in Kaliningrad, and well, I believe they've still got them in Crimea. So Russia puts its nukes right on the edge of its territories, and so you end up having these endless conversations to people because they're just not educated.
Yeah.
Sorry to offend Smithy there.
Yeah. I love this comment, not because of the first sentence, but Jonathan, as always, you're inspiring. Well, I'm just being who I am. Thank you for today's second video. Now, this is really important to me. It is alarming as well as encouraging. I really want people to watch that second video today, if you haven't, which is the one where I say we are going towards a world war. There's a lot of good sources and a lot of information, I think, in there that's really worthy. But this is what I really like. I don't like Hillary Clinton, says Kevin Scholl, but everything she said was so accurate. And I'm glad he said that, because when I introduce her speech in that with, you may hate Hillary Clinton, she might be really divisive in terms of what your political opinions are, but don't shoot the messenger. Listen to what she says. She is absolutely on point with everything she said in that section, and I just thought that's really encouraging. That whole panel of people in that lunch at the security conference video. You had the Belgian Prime Minister, the Estonian Prime Minister, the Czech President, you had the Bulgarian Prime Minister, you had the Danish Prime Minister, as I said, Timothy Snyder, Neil Ferguson, and Applebaum, General Petraeus. All of these people were saying that, and Hillary Clinton, and saying the same things. They were all singing off the same song sheet, and it was all worrying, but in the fact that they were all united in how worrying it is and how much we have to do, and putting our military equipment where our mouths are, and talking about the information war as well as, and the cyber war as well as the battlefield war. It was really encouraging. And that's why I really like that statement, because it's like, yeah, it was alarming, but also encouraging that there's this recognition of how serious this is right now. So anyway, yeah, please go and watch that, guys. So just to continue, Kyiv will allocate almost 70 million hryvnias from the budget to the training of drone operators in the Defender of Kyiv program for 2024. That money is provided for the arrangement of a laboratory cluster of controlled technologies, design and repair of drones and radio electronic systems. These funds will also be used for the purchase of drones, materials for their maintenance, multimedia panels, computers, 3D printers, and other things, said Dmytro Bilotsev-Kovets, co-chairman of the UDAR Vitaly Klitschko faction of the Kyiv City Council. In other words, they're putting money and effort into drones, into training drones, into creating them. It's everything about drones. Drones are super, super bloody important. Now, for the Russian point of view here, North Korean factories are working at full capacity to supply shells to Russia, according to Yonhap News. So according to the South Korean Defense Minister Shin Won-sik, the country has already sent about 6,700 containers to Russia. This is huge news, right? And the South Koreans and the UN need to be up in arms about this. Quote, this amount is enough to accommodate approximately 3,152 mil artillery shells and 500,000 122 mil artillery shells, the report said. In other words, North Korea have provided and continue to provide a huge amount of artillery ammunition that is effectively propping up the Russian war effort. That's how serious the the North Korean assistance is. Any thoughts on that, mate?
Oh dear, I was just laughing at the comments. Sorry, JP, I wasn't listening to that one.
That's no problem. I will move on swiftly, but I am going to say just a few thank yous.
But how did you pronounce Grivna?
Yeah, exactly like that. So, yeah. So Richard Demi, thanks. In Ireland and soon to be in the grey zone, I want my kids to be living in a democracy and will keep giving what little I have as often as I can. Thank you so much. I mean, goodness me, I'm honoured you think that giving it to me is useful. So thank you. And hopefully, all the charity involvement that my channel has with Greg, Terry, and Ukrainian and Prof. Gerdes is in the link, is in the description below. So please help out in all the ways you can. But thanks, Richard. That's amazing. And it is what's so not good about this. What the silver lining of this horrible war is that many of us are coming together to understand, I think, geopolitical issues probably better, understand our place in the world in an interconnected world, and understanding that moral issues abroad can just as readily affect ourselves in our own nations. And I think that is testament to that. So thanks, Richard. Mark Bisque, who is just one of the greatest legends of all time in Canada, said, I said 2 years ago, Ukrainian in Canada, 2 years ago that World War III has started. It's just going to take a long time to really get going. We're in this together for a long time, gents. Say hello to Matt from us, and please share this with him. Get some wine for yourselves, from Mark and Olina. That's really kind of you.
That is lovely, Mark.
Yeah, so thank you. I'll be having to get some, I don't know, some Bundaberg ginger beer or something.
No, I will come and visit one of these days, and then you'll owe me a few drinks.
That I will. Yeah, just a couple. And Javier Alvarez says, I hope words meet action and EU supply everything Ukraine needs. No red lines and quick delivery. My point of my videos today, Javier, is that I feel this, kind of almost feel it in the air. I just feel that there's been this step change in rhetoric. And I think people are actually desperately scrabbling around to get that ammunition, to get that stuff to Ukraine. Like, we are seeing a ramping up. So Kaya Kallas said at that same meeting I keep referencing, she said, I think it was her, said, look, I just spoke to someone in the defense industry who said to me personally, we have ramped up 10 times what we were. Like, and that's one company saying we are producing 10 times more than what we were 2 years ago. This is significant. So I think it is like turning a tanker, but I think in meaningful, this is why I say that I am positive for Ukraine going forward. And right now it's is terrifying for Ukrainians, and Ukrainians are losing land because the Russians sense a weakness and are piling in big time. And the biggest challenge are those aerial guided glide bombs. They are being used up and down the front lines and now on the northern borders as well. Right, that is a huge challenge. But going forward with industrial provision at home for the Ukrainians, industrial provision in Europe, industrial provision in the US, even though there's an impasse in Congress, factories are working overtime. So once that aid is given a green light, I think there's going to be a ton of stuff. Somebody was telling me, a number of you have told me on the threads actually, that you've no contacts here and there in military bases, that apparently it is all loaded up and palletized and basically ready to go. So as soon as Congress passes the aid, that is on a plane to Europe, and that is getting to Ukraine to streets. So
it's
that's
still got to get across the Polish border.
Yeah, and we'll come to that. Let's move on to a bit of chat about Taurus. Olaf Scholz has ruled out the delivery of Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine at the present time. Chancellor justified this with the risk of Germany becoming involved in the war. Scholz is annoyed by the lack of balance between what is really needed now and the debate about this particular system. Okay, two things there. I'll take the second part first. I actually get that from Olaf Scholz, and I do understand that. And this is reflected by how much hassle, say, German aid to Ukraine was given by people online because he's German and he's reporting aid, and he's getting hassled about Taurus. And so Germany as a whole and Scholz will be given an inordinate amount of stick for not giving the Taurus. Now, whether that's justified or not, you can understand him going, hang on, we are doing all this other stuff and we have ramped up artillery production, which is what they desperately need even more. To a huge degree, we are doing things. So that you keep belaboring this point about Taurus is to not quite have a proportional understanding of what's going on. So I do get that. On the other hand, his defense for not providing Taurus, I don't think is good enough. So at no point and in no place should we be linked to the goals that this system achieves. That is why it is not the next option for action on the agenda, he says. Now it's official. Olaf Scholz is lying with the argument that he refuses to be able to deliver Taurus to Ukraine because German soldiers have to go to Ukraine to do so. I contacted the Ukrainian parliament through a friend, says Jürgen Naubit. Yehor Cherniev, this is a Ukrainian parliament member in the arms committee, answered me right now. He said, quote, I was at Taurus manufacturing facility last week and they have told me that all they need is Ukrainian soldiers in Germany for training, and that's it. Ukrainians will be ready. In other words, what he has said, Olaf Scholz, that you would need German soldiers on the ground if you're going to have Taurus in Ukraine in order to help get this ready, is ostensibly not true. Also, the producers of Taurus have publicly stated that it is easy to quickly replenish Taurus stockpiles since scaling up production is not a problem. And this myth, quote, that stocks are too low, we can't give them to Ukraine, is not true. The myth has been publicly debunked. So there's a lot of pushback to Scholz about this. Scholz said that he was very annoyed by the lack of balance between what is really needed now in the discussion about Taurus. And he said what Ukraine lacks is ammunition for all possible lengths and distances, but not primarily from Germany. I would just disagree. I think they need both. And if they can provide Taurus, that would be a massive, massive benefit to Ukraine. Any thoughts on that?
Look, they should do it. But the other thing is what targets are they going to be hitting with Taurus? Ignoring the bridge. Because isn't Taurus more designed for bunker busting? There's not that many bunkers, that the Russians have in Ukraine. And I've just said before, I prefer that that Germany just keeps supporting with everything else, and get the UK producing Storm Shadow. Here you go. Here's 5,000 Storm Shadows. Go at it.
Yeah, and that's that. Do you know what? That's a good point, mate. But I don't know. I just don't know. I'm sure there are targets out there, like even just destroying things like the naval headquarters in Sevastopol.
Yeah.
I know that's been gone. They're now in Novorossiysk, but which is then goes to your point that what are the bona fide Taurus type targets within Ukraine? So that's a good point. Sally Luz here says, Tony, because I was questioning Tony. I wasn't questioning Tony. I was just like always just being skeptical and wary. Tony served in the International Legion, had to go back to the US and worked hard to return to Ukraine. He's a real guy for real. Awesome. And thank you for that, that confirmation there. That means a lot, by the way. So thank you to Sally Luz for that information. And Tony, if you ever want to be interviewed, I would happily do so.
Everyone's saying that the Taurus could be used on Putin's bunker. So there you go. I stand corrected.
Yeah.
Which one? Which
But
bunker?
of course, if you can't use it outside of the Ukrainian borders, 91 borders, then that's to what Matt is talking about, which is a real challenge, because you have to get you're going to want to use it on your top level targets. And I guess if they are just sort of spread out bases, maybe, or training facilities, you know, that one Taurus might take out like 15 people or something like that, then that's not a good use of Taurus. So I do get that. It's a good point. Fabian Hoffman says, looking forward to the German Chancellor explaining why it's necessary for German soldiers to input targeting data into South Korean Taurus, KEPD 350K, so that South Korea can preemptively destroy North Korean launchers and decapitate its leadership prior to a nuclear launch. I think this is a tongue-in-cheek point that I presume South Korea have Taurus and they don't need German soldiers on the ground in order to use Taurus themselves. So, you know, point taken. And then Schultz gets community noted. I love this. So what Twitter does have is this ability to fact check people from community people who are being sort of vetted, that then fact check. And Olaf Scholz has fact checked himself. Scholz gets community noted. He has falsely suggested that by sending Taurus to Ukraine, Germany would somehow become a sort of belligerent in the war. The note cites Storm Shadow and Scalp as proof otherwise. Like I keep saying, Taurus are not categorically different from Storm Shadow and Scalp. All they do is add a little bit of range and add a little bit of explosive capability, but it's not like a new thing. And this is just spectrum of change. And it's an invalid argument. It just really is invalid to say, oh, we can't, no one has produced anything like Taurus for Ukraine, so we don't want to go over this red line. It is not, it is in no way categorically different from what they already have from the UK and France. And finally, German aid to Ukraine. It's a really lot. I'm not going to read it out here, but he's like, please stop hassling me. Stop coming on my threads and insulting me for what Olaf Scholz does. Yeah. It's like, but I feel for this guy because he said it before. He had a time previously when Taurus was not given the go ahead, when he was given hassle. It's like that guy works his socks off to provide incredible information concerning German aid to Ukraine. He's just, I'm amazed. When he said he was 25 on my interview with him last, I was like, that blew my mind away. I was like, God, if I was half that with it at the age of 25 and wasn't just pissed up in a university bar, then you know, props to him is all I can say. Anyway,
at least you were standing up in the university bar. I was on the floor.
Yeah, so. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I've got that over you. So if there's anything in the threads, let me know, Matt. But we'll go on to a bit of geopolitical stuff now. So, Justin, Russia will go to war with NATO if troops are deployed to Ukraine, says the Kremlin, according to the Daily Telegraph. So this is in response to, as I said earlier, Emmanuel Macron convening that meeting, emergency meeting in Paris, which I say is a really good thing, saying all the right things, but also saying and putting this out there that Western troops or NATO troops might end up in Ukraine. He didn't say how, didn't specify it be on a front line, but it's putting that idea out there, which normalizes the conversation topic. And I think that's a really clever thing, an astute thing for him to have done. I absolutely agree that he said that. Now, Russia is coming back and saying, if that happens, we're going to war with NATO, which sounds escalatory, but do you know what? Russia say that kind of stuff all the time. It's just
how about if NATO troops go on holiday and fight in Ukraine?
There you go.
Russia set the precedence for that for 8 years.
Well, yeah. What do you mean by that?
Well, that's every time Ukraine identified Russian troops in Ukraine
Yes, of
fighting for the
course.
separatists.
Yes.
They were always on holiday, and I don't know how many times I argued in the threads with idiots, going, oh, but they're on holiday. It's like, really, what country allows its trained soldiers to go on holiday and fight in another war?
So this is the Little Green Men, the illegal war that Russia
Yeah.
incurred upon Ukraine from 2014 onwards by sending their military in, taking off the insignia, which is illegal, sending them into Ukraine and claiming they were the Donetsk People's Republic or Luhansk People's Republic militia armies, freedom fighters from Ukraine, and they were Russian soldiers. That's now been proven beyond any doubt, and I think Putin has actually formally admitted it.
Well, he admitted in Crimea, he admitted that Russian troops invaded Crimea. He admitted on Russian TV saying that, yes, I signed the order. So, he's admitted that Russia invaded Crimea.
Yeah, illegal war. There you go.
You know.
Hungary has approved Sweden's NATO accession. So we kind of we all know about that, but just to formally let you know that Sweden is in NATO, and that is absolutely massive because it means that they could well be getting Gripens Ukraine going forward. We know they've been somewhat trained on them. The question is, have they been trained under the radar, so to speak, on Gripens this entire time? What's your thought, Matt?
I was so excited by that news last night that I actually ran into the bedroom, woke up my wife to tell her, because Sweden's promising a lot of stuff if they get in, or the moment they get in NATO. So for me, it was incredibly exciting news.
Yeah.
I don't think my wife appreciated being woken up, but
A, I don't care. B, I don't care. C, no, but obviously she's Ukrainian. Like, if I said that to my partner, she'd just be like, "Oh, sod off." Like, you talk about this enough already. But no.
My wife said pretty much the same, just not in English. So there you go.
in all seriousness, though, it is like, this is massive. Sweden. So people don't realize how competent a military both Sweden and Finland are and have, right? People don't realize that these are not going to be anything other than a net benefit to NATO for massive reasons, for the troops they have, conscripted, well drilled, experienced troops. I've got Viggo Holmsson here who can testify to that, who has served in his, oh no, wrong person, in his Scandinavian. The Scandinavians, they know their onions, and they are going to be a serious benefit in not just capacity but capability for NATO, right? When you're adding those nations' geographical positions, then Russia is in a whole world of trouble. So with Sweden joining NATO, many are posting a map showing a NATO lake as the Baltic Sea, but there's a danger here, so be warned about this. Most haven't heard of the Kaliningrad or the Suwalki Gap. Those of us who have served in Europe believe if Ukraine fails, this will be the next Russian expansion. However, the point is valid that you look at where NATO is now, and Russia being able to get out of St. Petersburg or Kaliningrad out past Denmark and into the Atlantic Ocean, or the North Sea and then Atlantic Ocean. This is now just even more problematic for Russia, and they have to use that Arctic passage much more. But these are borders with Russia. That means that Russia will have to keep troops along that Russian border with Finland and Sweden much more active. This is just very good for NATO, and is again testament to how Putin has shot himself in the foot by starting this war because he was worried about the encroachment of NATO, and NATO's grown by 2 members to 32. Just, it's incredible.
There was a good post on one of the Darth Putin comments earlier when he was saying about NATO's expanding, and some user put back, yes, but now it's expanding in the other direction.
Yeah.
So it's not going towards the Russian borders. Well, it is, isn't it? Because they share borders, but
and Sweden's and Sweden's looking at hitting 2% spending this year, as well as all the help for Ukraine that they will be giving in other ways, being locally closer to Ukraine. So this is, I think, significant news. And if the Gripens end up being on Ukrainian airfields or even roads in the next 6 months, suddenly end up being in Ukraine, we can know that Sweden were doing things behind closed doors there. I don't know if that will happen, but I'm kind of really, really hoping that they have been training pilots secretly. Now, during a visit of Viktor Orban and Robert Fico to Prague, local activists met the politicians. So this is the Hungarian and Slovakian premiers. They have been met with shouts of shame. Ahead of the Visegrad 4 summit, a meeting of the leaders of Poland, Czechia, Hungary, and Slovakia, a group of demonstrators gathered to protest against the invitation of Hungarian and Slovak prime ministers, some holding a banner reading "Visegrad is dead." And of course, this is significant because those two nations they need to know that they are not popular and they need to be isolated more and more. The risk of isolating them too much, though, is you send them even more to Russia. So it's a really delicate balance of trying to get them on the side of the rest of Europe, or or they end up being the fox in the hen house, really. Any thoughts on those nations?
I was actually just reading that. I think I said that Russia and Sweden shared a border, and Hawkskull actually pointed out no, Norway actually wraps over the top.
Yes,
So
it's Norway.
I corrected.
At the time,
yes,
I was
yes.
like, is it Sweden or Norway? And
I actually thought there was
just
a really small border of like 10 kilometers, but yep, you are indeed correct. I looked at the map and I'm an idiot on
me too. I'll join your idiocy.
There you go.
Yeah. So what I wanted to show was this, right? So this kind of neck of the woods, this hopefully will give you sound. This is massively bloody worrying. So this is Vučić, who is essentially the Putin puppet in charge of Serbia. And he has been trying to play both sides for many years now. But really, we know that his bread is buttered by Putin. And if there's any other evidence you want of this, this is Vucic's view on Chinese television, as far as I can work out, on Taiwan. And this is massively worrying.
With us, it is very simple. I'm not going to take more than 10 seconds about it. You can count it. Taiwan is China. And it's up to you what, when, how you're going to do it. Full stop. Very, very simple. I don't know what would I can make more complicated about it, because it is simple and easy.
That, to me, is like super worrying. Just super worrying. It's like, yeah, Taiwan is China, and you can do what you want with it. You can do it how you want, where you want, when you want. You can do anything with Taiwan. Hey, it's up to you. It's yours. Whoa. That then gives you an understanding of where the Balkans, or at least Serbia, is sitting in terms of that geopolitical axis between, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and kind of the rest of the world, or at least the rest of the Western world, the global South notwithstanding. So, yeah, I thought that was quite a worrying 10 seconds of his time.
It is, isn't it? It's look, the real truth of it all, when you talk about any of these things, is militaries are going to be deployed, people are going to die. So when you're saying something like this, you're actually saying, hey, go kill people, be at it, rather than, China could have saved a lot of money if they'd spent it cozying up to Taiwan rather than, building a huge military to invade them, where they're just going to kill people and make more people go against them.
Absolutely. There's a couple of really useful things in the thread I'm just going to go back to for a second. So it's going to start with here. We're going to talk Gripen. So Elmer Hess says Gripen are much lower maintenance than F-16s, and that would be a big plus. So for those that don't know, so Gripens they can fly off shorter runways, or runways actually that are more full of FOD, foreign object debris. So if you get little bits of stuff on the runway, F-16s suck them up into the engine with the way that the plane is configured, and they have to have they struggle to fly off runways that are not perfect, basically. comparatively speaking. Gripens less so. Not only that, so their air intake is configured differently, so they don't suck up FOD. Not only that, they are cheaper to run quite considerably, actually. So they've got a much smaller maintenance footprint, and per dollars per hour in the air are significantly less, which would help Ukraine much more in the long run. They also have a much smaller maintenance footprint, so you can have a Gripen literally running off a road, set off to the side of the road in this kind of makeshift hangar, if you like, or just not even in that, with a small maintenance team where you can bring out fuel and weapons to it and have it take off from there. The idea was that the Swedes could operate the Gripens from kind of roads and different places around Sweden. They wouldn't necessarily have to be at air bases where Russia could just hammer the airbase. And so they've been designed also to take on Soviet airplanes. They fired things like the Meteor missile, which was far superior to what actually the Ukrainians will get on the F-16s, but also what the Russians have, or at least superior. And so there are so many good reasons why Gripen need to be used. And just to add to that, Viggo Holmsen says Finland has a large army, largest artillery in Europe. Sweden overall capabilities in all areas and military production are at the highest levels. So just what I was saying before, and hope that Sweden joining in NATO releases the Gripens. Also, Hungary needing them sets wheels rolling in production. So Hungary have actually got Gripens on order, and that will help out. Basically keep Hungary on side in terms of NATO, but also get the production wheels rolling. This will hopefully be good advertising for Gripen, and they'll get orders off the back of it, which would then mean that Ukraine will be able to have planes and maintenance more quickly, or quicker. So yeah, I think these are all really relevant points. Now, moving on. Whew. As to what Matt was talking about previously, Polish farmers will strike at the border with Lithuania. Right? So the protesters plan to stop and check the checkpoint between the Lithuanian town of Kalvarija, or Kalvarija, however you pronounce it, and the Polish town of Budzisko. All vehicles that may be carrying Ukrainian grain or other agricultural products will be checked. The protest action is scheduled to start on March 1st, when they are gearing up, and they're also going to have hauliers helping as well again now. So a major rally in support of Polish farmers is taking place in Warsaw today. The city centre is almost blocked. It's expected there will be about 10,000 participants. The video shows the participants on the march walking next to a large agro Abrams made of haystacks. So this is connected to the war. Like, there is no doubt that there are sentiments concerning the war that are wrapped up with these protest marches. And then the last 2 days of news from Poland, says Anton Gerashchenko, and he lists all the stuff, all the sabotage of Ukrainian grain trains and vehicles, and the checkpoints, and contaminated 30 tons being contaminated and being disposed of, being sent for biodiesel production because you couldn't save all the stuff that was spilled out the hoppers. It's all really annoyed the hell out of me. This is a massive problem for the Ukrainians, what's going on with the Polish farmers and hauliers, in my opinion, and it absolutely needs to be sorted out as soon as possible, as if not everyone knows that already.
It's despicable. It really is. I've got Polish friends over here that are just totally embarrassed about what's going on over there at the moment.
Yeah.
I do get actual text messages of apologies, which I go, what are you apologizing to me for? But they're really ashamed of what's going on.
Yeah.
So.
Just a few more thanks. Tahir, thank you so much from Norway. Some Norwegian love there. Brian Ivey, always such a great supporter. Thanks, Brian. Really appreciate that, mate. Good man. Louise Foley from Australia, one of your compatriots there. Thanks again, JP.
She's
and
down the road from me.
Really? Excellent stuff.
Down the road in Australia.
Which is like hundreds and hundreds of clicks. Johnny Christensen with some more Danish love. So thanks, mate. Some great Nordic love in general. Javier Alvarez again. So thanks, mate. Appreciate that. I like this sentiment. Let's part the discussion about Taurus, okay, and give a big thanks to Germany for their support. Let's focus on ammo, Gripens, and equipment from France. So ammo, Gripens, and equipment from France as a separate thing there. So yeah, I think France I'm going to be very interested. Javier, this is a good point. I'm very interested in what Emmanuel Macron has said in the last few days. In fact, his rhetoric has been increasing over time to the point where he's now called this meeting. I am hoping and expecting France to suddenly come in with some really big aid to Ukraine, or they might not announce it, and suddenly there's a bunch of French equipment in Ukraine. That's kind of my hope and my expectations, because otherwise that rhetoric is entirely empty, and I can't imagine he would be saying those things and not backing up with at least something. And thanks so much to Lynn in Arizona, back in Arizona, gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thanks, surprise it's us. I remember when she first was hanging out at the channel, I was like, Surpri say it Seuss, and it took me ages to work out. I was like, surprise, it's us. Like, oh, I'm so thick sometimes. Nonetheless, words. Right, Bloomberg. At least $488 million in sanctioned goods entered Russia from the EU in 2023. Russia imported high-priority banned goods worth $488 million, originating in EU countries in the first 9 months of 2023, a quarter of which came directly from Europe. Bloomberg reported on the 26th. So that is what I often talk about, which is a massive challenge. And I don't know really what you can do that's easy to sort that out, but it certainly needs to be done, whatever it is. In December, Putin promised that Russia would produce more than 1,000 of its own civilian airplanes, direct quote, by 2030. That's roughly 1 airliner per 2 or 3 days. That's what he promised by 2030, and he promised that in December, right? So this is during sanctions, and we know civil aviation industry has been absolutely hammered in Russia. In late February, so only 2 months after that promise, Aeroflot announced the appearance of the first import-substituted MC-21-310. However, so far, only in the form of a mock-up. The aircraft is promised to be shown at the World Youth Festival in Sochi in early March. Earlier, Aeroflot ordered more than 200 such import-substituted airliners. Production of the MS-21 was supposed to start in 2016, but since then, the deadlines have been constantly postponed, although the airplane has received a certificate for flight operations. According to optimistic forecasts, serial assembly of the MS-21 will start this year, or not. Carriers are promised to deliver 6 airplanes. So, by 2030, 1,000, more than 1,000 will be produced. 1 every 2 or 3 days. Absolute pie in the sky fiction there from Putin. Their airline industry.
Who are they selling them to?
Themselves, I presume, because they can't get them anywhere else.
They don't have that many flights. No one can afford them.
Well, yeah. I mean, there are many problems with what he's suggesting. Don't hit Putin with facts, mate. Alex Kocherov. Russia bans exports of gasoline from March 1st, 2024 for 6 months. Now, what does this tell you? As he suggests here, this follows multiple Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian oil refineries in the past 2 months, causing disruption at oil refineries. Ukraine's sanctions against Russia are working. So we often complain that things aren't happening enough, but actually, we don't know how many places are hit overnight inside Russia by Ukrainian drones and missiles. If they are producing drones at the rate that Russia are producing them, then they are going to be releasing them at that rate or massively stockpiling them for some huge, overwhelming attacks. I try and report what I hear, but I don't always hear what is taking place every night. And I think Russia is probably being struck by Ukrainian drones a lot more than we realize. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, they're getting spammed with Ukrainian drones. They really are.
Yeah.
It's
well, I hope so.
I can't say too much, but I can say that they're getting spammed, from what I know.
Okay, well, interesting. So that's good news, and what I'd expect as well. Now, a bit of wider geopolitics, but related to Russia big time. So the first batch of French Bastion armored vehicles in service with the Armenian army. France is going all out for Armenia and will also provide the Mistral short-range missile system and GM200 radar system. It's also open to provide Aster SAMP-T air defense systems. This is freaking massive. Okay, so what has happened is Armenia, which was once the the ally of Russia, particularly in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. Russia was more on Armenia's side. Armenia has now said it's going to come out of the CSTO, which is the Russian version of NATO. Azerbaijan, also not a big fan of Russia, particularly over that conflict. So you've got those two nations dropping out of the sphere of influence of Russia, with Armenia now going to France for its military aid. I can't tell you how important this is concerning Russia's wider influence in the region. Now, Zelenskyy, and this blew my mind. I mean, this is surely massively risky. Zelenskyy may make working visits to Armenia and Azerbaijan next week. Diplomatic sources indicated that the Ukrainian president is likely to arrive in Armenia on March the 4th. After that, he will go to Azerbaijan. That's massively risky, and he better have some pretty damn good security with him. But it shows you how important these geopolitical machinations just outside Russia are. You've got Georgia, you've got Armenia, you've got Azerbaijan, you've got Kazakhstan. Those places particularly are on the verge of dropping out of Russia's sphere of influence. Now, Georgia more in the population than the politics. Politically, they're aligning themselves more, but in the population front, I don't think there's a lot of love for Russia, given the Georgian war, etc., etc. There's a really good, or there's a quite good TLDR news on what's gone on with Armenia dropping out and being basically now in France's sphere of influence. So Macron has done probably a pretty good job. And again, me giving props to Macron again, has probably done a pretty good job of getting Armenia in the Western sphere of influence. And I think that is incredibly important. And that's pretty much that. I just wanted to alert you to a couple of things. I thought this was a good comment by John Smith on my thread this morning, saying, I wonder what secret intel is behind this new movement among the European powers. So I've talked a lot today and in my World War video earlier about how I think there's this inflection point, and we are seeing a different, it's a step change in the rhetoric and a step change, I think, in the European approach to supporting Ukraine. And he's saying, what's behind that? What's the secret intelligence? Is it simple and reasonable? Is it contingency planning for a Trump presidency? Or is it something reacting to alleged intel out there that the Americans were recently sharing about the next stage of Russia's war aims and the space weaponry? So we heard, and this got leaked because it was deemed as really serious, that Russia have got a new space weapon that they've sent into space. And that is a complete, because the next, Perun did a great video on satellite wars. We talk about what's going on in the ground and in the air and in the sea with warfare and hitting radar installations to stop intelligence gathering, that destruction of the A-50 aircraft the other day. But actually, so much intelligence is gathered in space by satellites, and there's long been analyses of what might happen in terms of satellite warfare, in terms of, I mean, this isn't just pie in the sky or satellite in the sky thinking. This is real, and it will happen, and it's probably already happening to some degree. There'll be plans afoot. How do you take out your enemy's satellites without rendering your own satellites really vulnerable? And I think part of what's happened at the moment in the fact that nothing's happened is this kind of game of chicken that no one wants to do the first thing, because then all hell gets let loose with warfare in space. But this could, what's been leaked about Russia recently could be a reason partly behind the rest of the world going, okay, we need to wake up here. I can't help but feel, he says, that the intel noise from February 2024 around the Russian space weapons project wasn't deserving of the genuine White House alarm that seemed to accompany it. So he's like saying maybe it's not as big as the alarm was. But actually, I don't think there was enough alarm about it in the wider press, to be honest. The recent energy surrounding European activity seems to have a different vibe. The Germans seemed unusually energized about resisting Russia late last year, but are again vacillating. Denmark recently signed a deal, and its Nord Stream recent investigation came to a very neutral finding. They've stopped. So another bit of news is that Denmark has stopped their Nord Stream investigation because they don't have enough information or whatever. Whether that is because it's not useful for them to continue it, or for the reasons they actually gave, I don't know. Oh, and they are promising their entire artillery part to Ukraine. Again, this is Denmark signaling things are really freaking serious. Sure, Zelenskyy has pushed forward on a very active PR campaign to unite Europe, but is there more to this? Really good questions there. I love it. And I don't know any answers to these questions, but something, I don't know whether it's just an actual realization of whether Ukraine has given intel to European nations that actually they're losing a lot of troops and they're losing a lot of territory, and things are going much worse than the Europeans realized. And maybe that's what brought the Europeans much more to the table, or something else. Matt, I've spoken a lot. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I'm terrified. How about that?
Brilliant.
When we talk about space weapons, wasn't there an agreement about no weapons in space or something? Or am
Yeah,
I
I think there is.
misremembering
Yes, I think you're
that?
right.
But I'm actually just the one thing that does scare me is the do you remember the film The Last Starfighter?
Yeah, but I can't remember anything about
Many
it.
years ago from our use, showing how old we are. But they used meteorites as weapons, and I'm
Right.
terrified for that moment. The moment humankind manages to start doing that, because
Yes.
that'll just wipe out, a whole country.
Yes.
Countries.
So here is what you're talking about. I think the 1967 Outer Space Treaty bans the stationing of weapons of mass destruction in outer space. It prohibits military activities on celestial bodies and details legally binding rules governing the peaceful exploration and use of space. Treaty entered into force on 10th of October 1967, has 110 states parties, with another 89 countries that have signed it but have not yet completed ratification. So nice one, mate. That's spot on.
Yeah, so it's there, but no one's really ratified it. Only, was that
The main players, yeah.
But look, as soon as nukes start getting used in space, like what Russia's talking about, it means nuclear fallout's going to be landing all over the world. I don't know about anyone else, but all these nuclear powers that we've got 6, 7 countries that have nuclear missiles. I can't think off the top of my head.
Yeah.
They're not going to be impressed if they've suddenly got radiation falling on their heads.
Well, I think it also there's going to be. I'm sure this is written into it, but I wonder what the definition of weapon is, or weapon of mass destruction. So actually, you're more likely to get things like a satellite that blocks another satellite being used, or some kind of element of a satellite that blinds enemy satellites in the localized
But the
area.
Russians were specifically creating a missile that had a nuclear explosion. That was their thing. So that is weapons of mass destruction in outer space and nuclear fallout. Otherwise, you could maneuver a satellite onto another one, drop 10,000 volts through it, and that'll be fine.
Yeah, EMP and stuff like that. So I'm just going to come to my I'm live. My boys just said, "Can you pick me up from school?" I'm saying, "No, I'm live. You can walk home, you lazy toe rag." So
mine's asleep. The benefits of being in Australia.
Right. I want to just talk about an idea, just to, I guess, end before unless there's anything else other people want to add in. Now, I'm a liberal that believes in tolerance, but I used to talk about my mates with this. I used to talk about this idea called liberalism with teeth. And actually, it's born out this idea of the paradox of tolerance. So Karl Popper used it as a kind of philosopher of science, actually, mainly. But he talked about this idea of paradox of tolerance, which is that if you are tolerant, and I like to see myself as a tolerant person, but if you're so tolerant that you tolerate intolerance. So imagine there's like some fascist Nazis or something out there, and I'm so tolerant. I'm like, oh yeah, you're entitled to your opinion. I don't like that. I don't think people are entitled to their opinions if they can't justify them. You can have an opinion. You're not entitled to it unless you can justify that. Otherwise, the moon is made of cheese. The moon is made of cheese. Like me saying I'm entitled to that opinion is kind of meaningless. Well, so all that means is you're entitled to freedom of speech. No, you're only entitled to opinion this is my opinion, if you can justify that opinion to me. Otherwise, it is just a mere assertion and it ain't worth jack. So anyway, if I'm super tolerant and I tolerate like a fascistic Nazi, and then I tolerate them to the point where that person like eradicates me, then my tolerance is paradoxical because it tolerates a situation where intolerance reigns. Okay, are you with me there? So this cartoon here says, let's see if I can make it bigger. I can't. Anyway, it says, should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? You want more tolerance? Respect my ideas. The answer is no. When we extend the tolerance to those who are openly intolerant, so let's give them a chance, the tolerant ones end up being destroyed and tolerance with them. Any movement that preaches intolerance and persecution must be outside of the law. In other words, we cannot tolerate intolerance. As paradoxical as it may seem, defending tolerance requires us to not tolerate the intolerant. In other words, liberalism, or tolerance in this case, if you want to call that liberalism, tolerance needs teeth. You need to be able to say, I'm not tolerating what you are saying and doing there. So when it comes to something like Russia or Nazi Germany, liberal societies should be strong enough and have a military that is in accordance with their kind of liberal views to be able to defend those liberal, or defend everyone's rights to have a liberal society. And by that, I mean kind of free society, such that we do not tolerate the intolerance. And if the intolerant decide to invade, say, Ukraine, we should have the teeth enough to do something about it. I just wanted to end with that idea. Does that make sense, Matt?
It does. Look, from anyone else, I just say, we can be tolerant of things, but then when you enter the realm of stupidity, you don't have to tolerate that.
Yeah.
Whether you want to say it's flat Earth, or saying we should kill someone because of the color of their skin, or because of what religion they believe in, or what side of a border they sit on. To me, those are all just stupid things that shouldn't be tolerated. From anyone, anywhere, anytime.
Yeah.
Life's too precious. So
word, Jonathan. I presume that's to that point. And cool. I love sprinkling a bit of philosophy in, but I'm generally forgetting most of my philosophy these days because I know more about the range of some air defense piece of kit than I do. Brian has a different political view to mine. He says, I'll tolerate your views if they don't conflict with my beliefs. Just trying to understand your thoughts. I always think about, I will tolerate your views until they are morally problematic. And that's so I've changed as an atheist, I've changed my views on, I've chilled out a bit on religion. I used to try and correct people because I thought they're wrong and truth is really super important. And I still do believe that. But actually, so someone like Greg Terry, for example, who is a real benefit to humanity, I'm not going to argue with him about him being wrong about his religious views, because it's more important to me that we are morally aligned to do the right thing than he's wrong, in my view, about his belief about whether God exists or not. And so for me, there's like a hierarchy of needs, right? And at the top of that has to be like moral behavior. And so if you come to, so for example, like immigration, and you think, there are all these Islamic people coming to my country and this is a real challenge. Like, for me, that's only ever a challenge if they are, or any human, it doesn't have to be Islamic, it can be like whatever belief or secular, but like they might be a non-believing fascist. Like, if you come to my country and you have really morally problematic views, then we're going to have a problem here, and I ain't going to tolerate that. And so actually, either you can't be here, or I need to absolutely re-educate you on your moral evaluations. So that's how I would interpret it. So yeah, Brian, it pretty much, I think, yeah, that's pretty spot on if I'm with you, Brian.
Oh, can we go down the rabbit hole? Because we've got one here goes, what if I think something you find morally repulsive, like I'm an extreme anti-abortion guy, and I think you are a murdering life. I mean, that's the rabbit hole here.
Yeah, so this is when it comes. So, like, there are two different things here. Like, what do you do with that? Like, do you kill me because of my views, or do you try and imprison me because of my views? Do you stop me talking about my views? At the first port of call is like, well, we need to establish rationally whether our views are justifiable. I've literally given talks on this, on that very subject matter. So I can talk to you about what personhood is and how I would justify. I mean, very simple. There's a really interesting Alabama laws just come out talking about IVF, right? And this is going to be quite destructive, I think, for the Republicans if this is not approached and not dealt with. I think it's going forward to November 2024. But they've brought out this rule, which is that, and this is the personhood argument extended to a petri dish. So they've said an fertilized embryo, or a fertilized egg, if you like, in a petri dish is a child. It's literally, functionally, or not. It's philosophically identical to a child. It is a child, right? And so therefore, if you destroy a petri dish, it's murder. And they have, because with IVF, when you artificially fertilize eggs, but you have to collect a lot of eggs so that you choose the most viable eggs and then implant those in the womb. Now, what happens is almost always you just end up destroying all of those other eggs unless you pay to have them frozen. But you destroy all those other eggs and no one thinks anything about it apart from unless you believe those are children. Now, you can do lots of really interesting thought experiments. I don't want to derail this too much, but the simplest thought experiment is if you had 10,000 petri dishes with fertilized eggs and one toddler or one baby sat there and there's a fire and you had to save one of those things, would you save the baby or the 10,000 petri dishes? And the obvious answer is you'd save the baby. So therefore, there is a significant difference between the baby as a child and the petri dishes as children. And so, and and I could bore you with loads of thought experiments that go down that route. But if your thing is a personhood argument, like there are different ways of arguing anti-abortion, but just to let you know that it would be incumbent upon me to establish my views, and it would be incumbent upon, say, this chap has a different view to mine, to establish their views. So the first thing we do is we rationally argue about it, and I would try and convince him otherwise, and he would try and convince me, and hopefully at some point someone wins that argument. But the problem is these arguments don't have really very clear winning positions, because it depends about what you put into your function machine as to what conclusion you get out, garbage in, garbage out. And so usually you'll find that people put different things in the bottom of their machines that gives different conclusions. And until we argue about what goes into the bottom, we're not going to get a solution, which is why you have Supreme Courts to try and work this stuff out. And it gets very complicated. Now, I would prefer that this argument takes place in the like intellectual spaces and the information spaces. But as soon as it turns into like firebombing a Planned Parenthood clinic, if it turns into that, then we're going to have problems. So anyway, these are the sticky areas of how far your intolerance should be taken.
I was singing "Every Sperm Is Sacred" in my head, if you remember the Monty Python one.
Yeah, that's an absolutely wonderful start to a film. Anyway, I don't. Yeah, that is a really divisive topic, but I would happily talk about that till the cows come home. And as I've said, I've written extensively on it. I can show you like dozens and dozens of articles I've written on that, and I've given public talks on that very topic. But nonetheless, probably not for now. There was a really good question that came out that I did want to deal with, which is there's lots of abortion discussions going on in the side now. Damn it, I knew that would. There was one about it's just up here. Bear with me.
Was that the jizz in a sock? Was
no,
that the comment?
No, definitely not. I don't know what to say about that. Okay, this is one.
Well, you've got two 13-year-old boys, don't you?
Yeah, enough. So, that word again, GMS peers, congrats on all you did and on your trip to Ukraine. What realistically do you think you can change? Do you think can change the tide of the war? This is a really good question. And what changes the tide of the war? I don't know if we're actually looking at it right now, which is the change in the rhetoric, and therefore hopefully the change in meaningful aid being given to Ukraine. So what would change the tide of the war would be US aid to Ukraine. That's your first and most important thing. Second of all is the European nations uniting much more robustly around Ukraine, winning. And you are starting to hear the rhetoric in terms of people very publicly saying we need to stop talking about being in for as long as it takes. We need to talk about Ukraine winning. And we also need to follow up our rhetoric with the goods. That is starting to happen. The industrial military complex is ramping up in Europe. The missing component is the US and what goes on with that. So if you had a united US Congress, which you essentially do bar the MAGA lawmakers that are stopping it, but if you took them out the equation, you would have a bipartisan support.
Of the American viewers on that one, is it possible for them to have a secret ballot? I have no idea if in America you can have secret ballots, so I'd love to just hear.
There is some provision in some contexts to have that. I forget now, but yeah, sometimes they do have secret ballots.
Sorry to interrupt your stream.
They have that?
Yep,
no, but I think they had that with the speaker, some of the speaker votes, I think possibly. But anyway, yeah. So I think, as I've said a number of times before, I think this is a relatively easy war for Ukraine to win, because the challenge is the boots and the mobilization. That's the big challenge. That's the really difficult part for Ukraine, is the boots on the ground. But if they bite the bullet and do a full mobilization, it's just stuff. They just need stuff, and the rest of the world, who are going to be allies of Ukraine, can give stuff. It just needs political will. It's not that's really difficult. It's just building things, right? We just build things and then we give them to Ukraine, or we have warehouses with that stuff already built, like America does, like US does, and you give that to Ukraine. It is that easy. And for me, it is just basically long range munitions. It's, as I keep saying, sorry to bore you, but it's 10,000 HIMARS missiles. It's like 3,000 ATACMS. It's like 1,000 Storm Shadows. Oh, we don't have them. Build them. Frickin' build them. Oh, but we don't produce them anymore. Build them. It's 1,000 Taurus. It's precision guided Excalibur rounds. It's artillery ammunition by the million. It's just stuff. Just like build stuff. Like someone said rightly at that Munich security conference. Sorry, I'm ranting, Matt. I will let you get a word in edgeways soon. But at the Munich security conference luncheon, someone rightfully said, do you know what? When COVID hit, the world went nuts and we got a vaccine expedited freaking quickly, much quicker than the vaccine's ever been created, right? And a whole bunch of companies got vaccines created, right? And we threw money at a global pandemic problem, right? So therefore, if there's the political will, there is clearly the way. Again, I go back to this idea that it is relatively easy for Ukraine to win the war, as in on paper, it's easy. It just takes a united political will. That's your difficult part. Rant away, go hard. Go big or go home. I'm going to rant big, and then I'm going to go home. Oh, I already am.
No, you've got to give me your address, because I want to do a Ranty McRant face T-shirt for you with you ranting. Like the Boaty McBoat face.
Yeah.
And I've been just absolutely dying to do it, but you never send me your address. So
I'll send you my address, no problem. Yeah, I'll get that to you. I am going to do some people have been reaching out and saying, look, can you do like some merch? I do have merch already, but can you do some merch with ATP and the Ukraine flag and stuff like that? I need to get designing some more stuff. It's relatively easy for me to do. I'm just the busiest man ever. So if anyone wants to get on Photoshop, I know it'll be a thankless task, because I'll just be saying, thank you, mate. That's really kind. But if anyone wants to throw a few designs my way, I'll happily whack them on a t-shirt or on a mug and supply whoever gave me those designs.
We got to do the Ranty McRant face t-shirt then with, yeah, okay, that's on. I'll do that.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
Right, so just to sort of drift our way to the end here, it's been long enough already. Lynn, thank you so much. Surprise, it's us. ATP 5 Geopolitics memberships. I probably already thank you, but thank you again. Nick Owen became a YouTube member, so thank you for Lynn for that. But I don't know how that happened, but thank you, Nick, for being a member and for always being such a great support too. Parrot Andy, thanks, mate. Really appreciate this, mate. Bit of pocket money for you, Mr. P. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. Parrot, you are a bit of a ledge. Is there any other business, Mr. Bishop?
Yeah, look, I wanted to talk to you about, well, literally interview you about your experience in Ukraine, but we have gone on for.
Yeah, I think we'll do that. We will do that. I think we'll have a live together, mate, where we can just chat about my experiences.
I'd really love to because we've all seen the little bits and pieces, but you've never had a chance to really talk through your experiences in a question. So I'll say to everyone in chat, grab one of my comments somewhere and just spam questions on it, and then I'll go through a whole pile of questions to ask JP.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be good. And we can have a reverse interview.
Yeah,
sweet as a nut. Well, thanks for that, mate. And thank you to all the people out there. The reason I wanted to speak to you, and I've ended up speaking for an hour and 50 minutes on like all sorts of crazy stuff, but basically it is this worry of, I think we are now in a world war much more formally. It's a spectrum, isn't it? And at some point you cross the line that you designated that's a world war and that isn't. And it is just completely subjective and somewhat arbitrary. But for me, this is a world war and probably has been for some time. As Timothy Snyder says, we've been in a world war. We just haven't realized it, primarily because there's one side fighting on behalf of all of us. But yeah.
Oh, Lawrence just turned up, huh?
God, Johnny come lately, Lawrence. I was waiting for you the whole time, and there you were with your thumb up your backside. No, thanks, Lawrence. Really, I shouldn't say that. He's just giving me.
I was going to say about the World War III thing. I've always said to everyone, I expect World War III before I'm 60. So that's 10 years and a few months. So I'm expecting World War III. I think there's 3 major contesters against the US and we'll say the West, and it's going to kick off if there isn't a strong control over what's going on in Ukraine. So if people support Ukraine, it's going to head off World War III. If that doesn't happen, we are going to have World War III.
Yeah. So
that's simple.
So it's a really good point, because I didn't mean to talk about this, which is us piling in to this kind of war. You might think is world war, but there's an argument to say actually you pile in to prevent a larger world war. So, but then the question is, would that be escalatory and so on and so forth? And the problem is, if you're so worried about it being escalatory, then you are playing, it's that kind of tolerance of intolerance. You're playing into the bully winning, really. I love this from Brian Ivey. So Brian says Jonathan's last rant at the pub burned it down. So my local pub that sells Tanglefoot, can I just say, one of my favourite beers, a Badger brewery.
Don't rub it in that we can't get it over here.
It burnt down recently, and I was thinking the FSB were after me, because that's a pub that means an awful lot to me, and it's a beautiful pub literally on the seafront overlooking the sea. You sit in the pub garden, it's the beach. It was just lovely, and it burned down, but it turns out it was a faulty tumble dryer. However, like I'm thinking it was probably the FSB, or like my last rant just sparked it off. I love that. Thanks, Brian. And this is Sarah. So I presume saying something about the live event in London. So Brandon said at the live event in front of a huge audience, saying basically, F your medical aid. We're not trying to win the Paralympics games. Send your weapon and ammo. Really good point. Send both. Of course, they do need medical aid, but you're absolutely right. I mean, the point there is salient, which is, yeah, would send you weapons, and as Denmark have done, giving all of your artillery is a massive statement to say we're only ever going to use this artillery against the Russians, and at the moment the Ukrainians are fighting them, so let's just give it all to the Ukrainians. Yeah, and I've long said that about our Challenger 2 tanks, but there you go.
I saw a video not long back about how impossible it is to invade Australia. So Australia, just give everything apart from the couple of subs and a couple of planes, give it all. We don't need anything else. And apart from that, I mean, who wants to invade us? We've got snakes and spiders and sharks and jellyfish and,
I mean, on most metrics, Australia is the worst country on earth. So, I was going to say, and Matt's there. That's another one. No, but Matt's there.
I agree.
No, that's a metric.
No. That's a good reason not to come here. It's. I mean, you've been here. You understand it's a fallacy. We tell everyone all these horror stories so they stay away.
I loved Australia. Good times over there. Back in 1996, backpacking my way around. Beautiful times. Anyway, that's enough of that rubbish. You don't want to hear that. Anyway, everybody, thank you very much. Matt, thank you very much.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, no worries. You can get some well-earned sleep now, and good to speak to you. And it's good to have Jeroen. JR, my friend, the mapping is done, so you could do an update if you're ready. Gee whiz. I've literally been speaking to you guys all freaking morning. I have no voice left. My kid's probably had his bag nicked off to him and is walking down the road in nothing but his pants now and say, thanks, Dad, for not picking me up while I'm banging onto you lot. So
that's right. It builds character.
Yeah, I do need to do the mapping. I might have to wait, JR, till I've recovered and had at least 7 cups of tea. Anyway, thanks, JR. Good to hear from you, mate. Anyway, everybody, I keep trying to say goodbye. Goodbye, toodle pips and all that. Big love to you all.
Bye, everyone.